What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Cool Colas here, and you are now tuning into a new video on my channel. But before we get all into the topic for today, I'd love it if you did a few things for me. Hit the like button, subscribe button, share button, and the bell icon so you get notifications for whenever I come out with new content on this channel. And then when you are finished watching this video, I would love it if you left me a comment below. That way I can get back to whatever it is that you had to say about this topic for today. For today's topic, I want to talk about a topic that you all recently voted on. I want to do an entire breakdown on the black best friend trope. So let's get into it. Professor Black Truth talked about this on one of his broadcasts, but I want to kind of reiterate something that I've also seen too that he spoke about. They do this common template in the dominant society whenever they're creating different forms of media, especially when you look at these teen shows and comic shows that involve a teen character and that type of thing, where you have a bunch of kids at school, you have this protagonist who usually is quirky, they find this love interest, whether it be a man or a woman, depending on who it is, and then they have a friend group and they're all nerds or they're all geeks or they're all dweebs, and then you got a bully group that always picks on them. There's this common thing that they love to do all the time. So the first thing that typically comes to mind when people think about this trope is that image that I presented. But I promise you, it's that and so much more. And I think it's important that we really dive deep into where this shows up at, even besides the picture that I just painted for you. Now, when it comes to this trope, a lot of people tend to mix it up with the black sidekick trope. The big difference is that typically the black sidekick trope is relegated to comic lore. So a lot of times you'll see these comic television shows or movies where you have a black character and a white character and they're the best of friends and they're essentially their sidekick or partner in crime. And they do this quite a bit in shows such as, I'll give you a few examples. Matter of fact, before I even get into the examples, there actually was a meme that was out a while ago. I want to say it was back in maybe 2015. And somebody had said something like, have you noticed that in a lot of these comic shows and movies, you always have a white dude who has a black dude as a sidekick who is always having his back? So a lot of us who, are into, comic lore, a lot of us blurs who really look at this stuff probably found this very relatable, because this is a common thing that the dominant society loves to do, where they take this white superhero that everybody knows and loves and they give them a black sidekick that is helping them to achieve their goals and helping them to get to where they need to get to. And usually this sidekick is either powerless or they're an off-brand version of the hero who is, or the main hero who is supposed to be their white best friend. So you can see shows such as Flash, where you have Joe, which is like his kind of fake dad. He has no powers. He's just a police officer. Then you have shows like Arrow, where you had Oliver Queen, and then he had a sidekick named Diggle. Diggle was just an off-brand version of Oliver Queen, and he wasn't really that well known in the comics. And then you have movies such as, the Captain America movie, where you have Captain America Steve Rogers and his sidekick was Falcon. Later Falcon became Captain America, but you get the point. He was Steve Rogers' sidekick before that. And then you have Iron Man, who had War Machine, who was his sidekick and who was played by Don Cheadle. So again, in those other movies, you had this black character who was an off-brand version of the white superhero that everybody knew and adored. And then in the case of shows like The Flash, you had this character who was a powerless black man who was, again, the sidekick who had the main character's back, that being Barry Allen, who was a white superhero speedster. So they do this quite often with the black sidekick trope, but the black best friend trope just takes this to an entirely new level. One thing that you really need to understand about the black best friend trope is that it's almost somewhat like a trope port or a trope hub, for lack of better words. You know how you get these devices and they have different types of ports in them, like, you know, you may get this little connector device and it has a USB port, it has an HDMI port, it has a second HDMI port, and they're all like a little bit different, and you can attach it to something in order to use that port to try to put something either on a different device like a computer or whatever that thing may be. This is the port or the hub for other tropes to exist, or other tropes to, it's a gateway to other tropes, basically. So think about it like this. You have a lot of different scenarios where the black best friend trope can show up. In some scenarios, and I'll present 3 to you so you kind of have an idea of where I'm going with this. You have it where there's some cases where there'll be 2 friends, they're best friends, one's black and one is white. In the first scenario, you'll have it where there's a main white character and then there is a black sidekick. The second scenario is when you have, and I'm sorry, the first scenario is when you have a main white character and a black person who is a sidekick, and they both are protagonist, heroes, or whatever you want to call it. In the second scenario, you will have a black person who's a main character, a white person who is the side character, and they both are protagonists. And then in the third scenario, you'll have it where there is a black and white person. They're both best friends. Usually the white person is the main person of the two, and the black person is the sidekick, and they are antagonists, and they're usually in a bully group. In the first scenario, as I said, you have it where in some cases there may be a white main character and a black side character, and they both are heroes or protagonists. What they're generally doing in here is creating a psychological game, and they're playing psychological warfare. What they want is for you to envision that the black person is subservient to this white character. When a black person sees that they are represented in some type of show or movie, especially when they have been starved of representation properly for such a long time, they will scrape up the crumbs that are given to them. And ultimately, what they're doing is they're psychologically training black people to desire or be cool with tokenism. And that's essentially what they're trying to create, is a token image. Because you'll have this main white character, and a lot of the other characters will be white as well too, or they'll be non-black. And then you'll have this one black character, and they are the sidekick of the white character. And a lot of times this often leads to magical Negroism, where the black person's sole purpose is to be an aid to that white character. In some cases, despite them being magical, or called the magical Negro, they're not really that magical. In some cases, they are magical. It's like they can do everything. It's like they're perfect. I mean, think about shows like Rugrats, specifically All Grown Up, where Susie was always the voice of reason and the level-headed friend to Angelica. So think about stuff like that. You typically see these images where there's a white person who is the main character who has flaws and other things going on, but they mean well. And you have this black person who helps them keep their shit on track. So they typically do that type of image when they want to show you that, hey, this black person's sole purpose is to create a better situation for this white main character. In the second scenario, as I stated, you'll see a black main character and a white side character. Typically with this scenario, it's a little bit different than the first that was presented. Usually the show itself is a mostly black show. Most of the characters are black. The themes deal with black, specifically foundational black American culture. And you'll usually have one white character that is sprinkled in there, and they're usually the best friend of the black character. And good examples of this would be shows such as That's So Raven, The Proud Family, and Static Shock. And they typically do this because they want to make sure that white people are always inserted into every single thing that black people do. They do not want to give the complete shine to black people whenever they have a show, and that show could possibly be phenomenal. They have to have it so that white people are somewhat involved in the picture no matter what. It's also psychological because it makes black people who view this show or movie believe that they have to have white people present in order for them to be successful, in order for them to be fair, in order for them to be individuals who can succeed, but they have to have some type of aid and help from the dominant society. They are playing psychological games because they're making you feel like you are burdened to be equitable and you are burdened to only be able to succeed unless a white person is there to help tame you or aid you. So they create this image for that purpose. Some of you all may think this is a reach. I know how some of y'all get. You're goofy and you can't really see bullshit when it's right in front of your face. But I'm here to tell you, this is some serious shit. Now, the next thing that we need to kind of look at with that is they tend to do this agenda. And I want to name it. So I'm going to name it something right now. If I can think of a better name, I will tell you what that is later. But we're going to call this, for a lack of better words, the white exception agenda. And usually they have this thing where in some of these shows, they'll do an episode where they're trying to tackle racism or racial discrimination. That being racism via a white person towards a black person. And what they'll do is they'll have an episode where this black person is facing this conflict where they're experiencing racism, and this white best friend of theirs, who's like the sidekick, is almost helping them and acting as a social justice warrior or an individual who is trying to tackle and dismantle racism or racist acts. This is done for multiple reasons. Number one, this is done to show, hey, not all white people are bad. You have some that are good. So when all you black people say that white people are this, white people are that, look at this white dude, look at this white girl. They're not so bad. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to take this small exception of white people who aren't racist and have them counteract all of the 90-something% of white people who are, and impose white supremacy on black people on the daily. So they're trying to use exception fallacy in order to make the point that there is no valid point in saying that racism exists when there are a few racists amongst millions of, there's a few non-racists amongst millions of mayo-eating white supremacists. Now, when you look at this type of dynamic as well too, what they do in some cases is make it where the white character actually was burdened more, or they come off like they were burdened more by the racism that was done to the black person than the black person was. So think about shows such as Static Shock. When Static Shock tried to tackle racism, a lot of people were like, Static Shock, he really tackled it. It's the best thing ever. They really stuck it to them. It was great. They really tackled racism. They were doing a great job, and they weren't doing shit. Let's really look at this. They made it seem like his boy, the white dude, was more impacted than Virgil was by his dad being racist. But they were ignoring multiple things. Number one, they were ignoring the trauma that Virgil himself was facing by having to experience his best friend's dad be racist towards him. Number two, that his friend was making it a big spectacle because he was upset with his dad for being racist while having known that he was racist for a while. So now the spotlight got taken off of Virgil experiencing white supremacy to his friend being so upset that his dad is revealing his racism. And they're also ignoring the idea that the mother is married to the dad who she knows is a white supremacist, which by proxy would make her complicit in white supremacy as well too. They ignored all these things, and they even doubled down on it when they had Virgil's dad have a conversation with him and say, well, imagine how Richie feels. Why the fuck does Virgil have to imagine how Richie feels when the racism was happening from a white person to a black person? See, now they got it to a point where they have Sambo soldiers who are going in and making it seem like it's more important to focus on how the white person was in fact impacted by another white person's racism than the black person who experienced it to begin with. In the third example, you'll have it where there'll sometimes be a bully group and you have a white character who is the main bully, and then they have a black sidekick. Now they're trying to do something very specific by portraying this. Generally, they're trying to create the message that oppression and antagonism is not something that is generally done by the white supremacists. They're trying to make the message that race has nothing to do with the oppression, hatred, disrespect, and subjugation that you see on a daily basis. Race is not a factor in this because if you look here, this white person can be a bully and this black person can be a bully. They're saying that it's not about this character, it's not about racism being a thing, but the fact that humans are flawed. And because humans are flawed, they have the tendency to do evil things. So they often put black and white people in these bully groups together because they believe that this is a way to balance out or cancel out this idea that bullies tend to be mayo-eating white supremacists. It's as simple as that. People need to understand that these images were created in order to exploit an image that is not typically seen. Usually when it comes to different friend groups, we see people generally hanging out with people who are of the same race as them. There's a lot of relatability when it comes to that. And I'll even go a step further. Typically, people don't just hang out with people who are the same race as them in the majority. They also hang out with people who are the same cultural and ethnic background as them as well too, because once again, there's a relatability factor. And then when you also tie in this idea of anti-black racism, then yes, there is going to be less of a likelihood that black people and white people are commonly going to be hanging out with each other. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but what I'm saying is that the typical thing that you'll see is a lot of black people, all black friend groups together, and then a lot of white people, all white friend groups together. Every now and again, you will see one off here or there, but what television is trying to show you is that the majority of the time we have mixed friend groups when it comes to races and cultures when we don't. And the reason why they're trying to do this is because they're trying to exploit an integration narrative. And they're also trying to pull a fast one over us to make us forget that integration itself was a tragedy and a travesty when it came to black people and black empowerment. They tried to exploit, bastardize, and twist up and remix some of Martin Luther King Jr.'s earlier ideals, especially when he talked about his "I have a dream" speech that all people will be created equal. They're trying to make it seem like that is the nail in the coffin to eliminating racism, when in actuality, integration has done a lot of different evils to black society. For one, it created a closer proximity to whiteness for black people, but not black equity, and certainly not reparations. Number two, it stunted black unity, and it also stunted our ability to work together as a group to build our community up, because now everybody is talking about being inclusive or trying to be included with the dominant society instead of us working as a unit, just like we did when we were working on Black Wall Street, when our ancestors, that is, were working on Black Wall Street. Number three, it was a form of controlled opposition pacifism that gave us these very small trinkets when we deserved so much more after everything that had been taken from us. And the next thing that I would say is that it allowed white supremacy to flourish in a covert manner. Whereas before we would see this very overt, very big, bad, wolfish racism, now it's allowing covert agendas to exist. And if we try to call them out as racism, which it is, then everybody is going to say that we are reaching, we are victims, we are all this other bullshit, because they like to be deceitful in a system of white supremacy. It's really as simple as that, y'all. All right, y'all, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say, and I'll definitely have more to come, so make sure you stay tuned. Other than that, I will talk to you later. Peace.